This is Ben and Mara for Stellar Strategy Gaming. Today we're going to be talking about the Broken Oath Paladin. Before we get into it, we'd like to thank you for listening and watching our videos. And if you like what we do, please leave a like, leave us a comment telling us what you think and maybe what subjects you'd like to see covered in future videos. To discuss the Broken Oath Paladin, we need to get a little bit into what a paladin is. People sometimes mistakenly think that paladin is like a cleric where they have a connection to a deity. It's not quite so. A paladin's power comes from within, from their devotion to their oath. They're actually a little bit more like a sorcerer in that way, and they even use the same modifier for casting, which is charisma. So you could think of this as a naturally powerful person who believes in something so strongly that that belief actually manifests as power that they can wield. There are horrible consequences for a paladin breaking their oath, and there are many reasons why a paladin might do that.
Oh, yes. First off, there are many examples in popular culture of what could be defined as Oathbreaker Paladins. Actually, one of my favorite is the Men of the Mountain from Lord of the Rings. They are quite literally described as Oathbreakers, but I wouldn't even say that they're necessarily evil because they ran away from a fight they knew they would lose. Like, why would they sacrifice their lives for a pointless cause? But then on top of that, you also have certain other characters throughout the entirety of sci-fi and fantasy who have become Broken Oath Paladins. For example, Avacyn from the Innistrad expansion of Magic the Gathering, who became everything she swore to destroy in the final expansion. Darth Vader from the Star Wars franchise, or Daybreaker and Nightmare Moon from My Little Pony.
Now, not everyone who breaks an oath is evil, and that could really lend itself to some interesting roleplay options if you want to play an Oathbreaker Paladin who is not evil. For example, the Hound in Game of Thrones clearly serves House Lannister, but at some point he decides that that's not the way he wants to go anywhere, and he goes off on a side adventure with Arya. Another example is the Mandalorian. He, in many ways, fits the bill for a paladin. He's dedicated to a specific code. This is the way, he always says, as do the other Mandalorians of his sect. But through the course of the show, we see him veering further and further away from it, being displayed most by whether or not he takes off his helmet. Toward the end, he takes off his helmet and switches it for a different one, and then finally, in the heat of the moment, he actually does take off his helmet in the presence of people when he has to. And finally, when he says goodbye to Baby Yoda, Grogu's not happening, it never will, give it up, Disney. At the end, he finally takes off his helmet in the presence of a room full of people. He doesn't even ask to have a moment alone with Baby Yoda before he sends him off with Luke Skywalker. Spoiler alert. So that is a character who has broken his oath and could potentially face very serious consequences for doing so, but he's doing it for all of the right reasons.
Yes. Now, there are also a few who broke their oaths not out of some issue with the oath itself, but because something within them snapped at some point. Good examples of this are Ahsoka from also Star Wars and Ice King. Now, to start off with, Ahsoka, she becomes a Broken Oath Paladin when she is framed for murder, and the Jedi Order basically kicks her out and she has to flee. Now, eventually she is invited back to the Jedi Order, again, spoiler alert, but at the same time, she actually says no, because she recognizes the hypocrisy of those same Jedi, and so she becomes the Broken Oath Paladin, not because of the oaths being problematic, but because something within her changed. And then Ice King, while he is literally a wizard, at the same time, throughout his story, we see that he starts off as Simon, who vows to protect Marceline, but he gets slowly corrupted by the crown, and while he does grow more powerful, Marceline does become a vampire, showing that he did fail in that task, and then he truly loses himself after this, whereas before he could resist its power. So it also shows, like, you don't have to be good or evil, you just have to be broken in some ways to become an Oathbreaker.
Absolutely, and I hope this is giving some inspiration for ideas to how to make a Broken Oath Paladin work as a character. One of the great missed opportunities in the Star Wars prequels that was sort of hinted at was showing some of the hypocrisy of the Jedi Order that contributed to Anakin becoming a Sith. toward the end of the third movie of the prequels is possibly the worst line in all of Star Wars, worse even than "Yippee, I'm going to be a Jedi," which is "only a Sith deals in absolutes," a statement that is itself an absolute. If you have a situation where your character is dedicated to an order of knights, and that order of knights starts to do things that go against their creed, but are still technically keeping their oath and technically retaining the good graces of society at large, then that's a really, really good and interesting formula for a paladin to go broken oath.
Oh, yes, and now that might be giving people a twinge of like, hey, I've seen that one before. That's because every character in Fullmetal Alchemist effectively is some form of a broken oath paladin. Because if you think about it, the military's job is to keep order and stability, and yet it becomes the main contributor to instability and insurrection within the entirety of, I believe that world's name is Amestria. And so in some ways, Alphonse and Edward are the most obvious candidates to become Broken Oath because they eventually leave the military and fight back against it. But then at the same time, you have characters like Kimberly, who is disgraced by the military because he goes his own path and then rejoins, almost becoming a Broken Oath of his own vows, separate of the military. So there are a lot of different ways you can be, again, Broken Oath without necessarily completely compromising your own character.
An interesting idea I had for a character would be a paladin who is a paladin of a chaotic or neutral deity, maybe neutral good or true neutral, or chaotic neutral or chaotic good. God like, say, Elistrai. And this paladin potentially could start making deals with other powers for additional power, so you wind up with something like a paladin warlock multi-class. A chaotic deity might actually allow it if it gives them the tools they need. In the example of Elistrai, if it gives them more tools to fight Lolth and save more draw from Lolth's influence, Elistrai might reluctantly be on board with it. And getting deeply nerdy with the lore, the character who we reference many times in this channel, Dritsto Erden, in some of the later of R.A. Salvatore's books, some of the drow speculate that Dritst might actually have Lolth's blessing because his rebellion against her sows chaos within the drow. So that could be a really interesting... Obviously, you don't have to use those deities. You can use any rival deities throughout the D&D multiverse. That could be a really interesting setup and a really interesting way for your paladin to start to go off the rails. And then, once you've done that, your paladin has a couple of options for how they proceed from there.
Yes, in fact, I'd say that there are usually three main paths to go down. There is the path of redemption, whereby your paladin seeks to get back onto the holy way to the point where there is a literal entire oath about redemption, though it's also the easiest set of oaths to break because it forces you to be pacifist. Then there is also the path of evil, which is the stereotypical one for this, where you embrace the dark forces and work with fiends and devils to keep your power and so on and so forth. But then there's also the middle ground path, which is sort of granted by that paladin's power coming from within, which is you don't have to side with another deity when you become an Oathbreaker. You can be an Oathbreaker and continue to level up in Paladin because that power comes from within, at which point it's more like, again, referencing back to Ahsoka, where she continues to become more and more skilled in the Jedi arts despite not being one. So there are definitely a lot of different ways you can go with that.
Yes, and with that last option, where I would probably go with it, for example, in Xanatar's Guide to Everything, one option is the Oath of Conquest Paladin, which parts of the tenets of the oath are things like douse the flame of hope, which is not only you have to defeat your enemies, you have to absolutely crush them. So say a tribe of goblins has been harassing a village, your paladin goes and deals with it, but now the paladin has killed the goblin warriors, now there's just goblin women and children. If this sounds a little bit familiar, it's what happened to Anakin on Tatooine with the Sand People. Sorry for bringing the prequels into this, no amount of evil is worth that. Moving on, that does put your paladin in a difficult position though, because dousing the flame of hope could definitely constitute continuing to do something unconscionable. But if you break the oath, you're now an Oathbreaker. What I would potentially look into with that, as mentioned with Ahsoka, is your paladin takes up a different oath. Maybe moves into Oath of the Ancients, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And you would work out with your DM and your party. Like, would you be taking any penalties for that? Would you, how would all that work? But it could be a really compelling and interesting story arc that could also incorporate a lot of what's going on in your D&D world.
Yes, and I'd even say that you don't even necessarily have to change what deity you worship to change what path you go down. At the risk of getting a little too much into real world religions, the even within the Catholic Church, there are very many different branches. The Inquisition was technically a Catholic movement, whereas at the same time there were things like the Knights Templar, who, while originally Catholic, definitely broke away at some point. So it really does show, like, there are very different aspects even within just one religion.
Yes, and even during the Crusades, even with crusading orders, there were the Templars, the Teutonic Knights, the Hospitallers, and a few others that I'm forgetting about that operated in different areas with different purposes and sometimes using different methods. So if you wanted to use that as your template, you definitely got options. I'd like to get a little bit into the mechanics of what an Oathbreaker actually does. Essentially, Oathbreakers have a lot of abilities that connect them to the forces of evil. At 3rd level, they get Hellish Rebuke and Inflict Wounds, 5th level Crown of Madness and Darkness, and it goes up as they level up. They can use their channel divinity abilities to control rather than destroying or turning undead, which is arguably more powerful. They also have the ability Dreadful Aspect, which each creature within 30 feet of them has to make a wisdom save or be frightened of the paladin for 1 minute. Now, as the paladins level up, they start to have abilities that aren't necessarily helpful to the party. Specifically at level 7, they get Aura of Hate, which, starting at 7th level, the paladin, as well as any fiends and undead within 10 feet of the paladin, gains a bonus to melee weapon damage rolls equal to the paladin's charisma modifier, a minimum of +1. A creature can benefit from this feature from only one paladin at a time, which is really a shame, because if you wanted to run an evil campaign with like 10 Broken Oath paladins conquering the world with a Baylor or something, that would be kind of an interesting way to do it. At 18th level, the range of this aura increases to 30 feet, and they get more abilities as they go up. That particular ability, that 7th level ability, is what makes the paladin potentially a hindrance to the party. One way to go with that is when they reach that 7th level, and they really are becoming a danger to people around them, provided you're in a campaign setting where undead and demons are a thing. That could be the sort of the spark that causes them to decide to change their ways and get back on the side of the angels, or not. You know, what do you want to do, DM and player, to make this character more interesting and keep it going?
Oh yes, and I would also say that there could be some very interesting tools there as well. For example, while the tiefling is technically classified as a humanoid species, it's still very vague and iffy exactly how that actually works, especially from a biological standpoint in D&D, of course. So if you have an underpowered tiefling in the party who's probably a bard, let's be honest here, and they can't actually do any damage, and for some reason their proficiencies don't work very well, the DM could say, well, at level 7, I mean, technically you have some infernal heritage, so this begins to affect the tiefling, you know?
Yes, and if I'm not wrong, there are variations of tiefling for elves called Feyre. There's an orc variation called the Tanaruk, and the dwarf version, I think the Durgar actually do have infernal heritage as well, although I could be mistaken on that one. Point is, you can make this work with a lot of different things. Also, this is a little bit of a stretch, but, you know, it's a game about magic and dragons. We can stretch a little bit. What if your characters are involved in fighting demons, and as happened to the angels, your characters start to take on a demonic aspect, and your Broken Oath Paladin suddenly one day is making all of your other characters more powerful? That could be are really, really interesting sort of body horror component to a campaign where your characters are actually changing in ways they really don't want to as a direct effect of whatever they're fighting.
Yes, now, that actually brings me to yet another interesting point, which is the angel of the abyss, as it were, or not the abyss, the angel of the nine hells. I forget her specific name, but she rules the highest layer of the planes, and she was actually a fallen angel, to the point where I find that this is really a great story. I actually reference it in our alignment video just because of how amazing the story is. She can still become an angel again. She can still become a full angel as long as her sword is returned to her. And she realizes what she has done and frees the city which she stole from the material, at which point she would regain her angelic abilities, and it actually does mention how she'd become more powerful than she used to be through this path of redemption. And so it really shows this Oath of Redemption character doesn't just apply to mortals either, or Oathbreaker Path. In theory, if you're running a campaign with literal gods, where you're going to be doing the God Fighter level 20 stuff, you could literally have her in your party as an Oathbreaker.
Yes, and you could do the same thing with Asmodeus or pretty much any other devil, because theoretically they all started out as angels that were corrupted by their contact with the abyss. So that's probably a topic for a whole other video, a whole other time. What to do if you wanted to play a party of Erinyes and Incubi and other corrupted angels that are on the path to redemption or not. So, again, I want to thank you all so much for watching and listening. We really appreciate your views, your likes, your comments, your subscribes. Please do smash that like and subscribe button. And Mara, what are we going to be doing next time?
Oh, next time we'll be discussing how to DM like Matt Mercer and some of the misconceptions surrounding it.
That's right, it's going to be how to DM like Matt Mercer in 7 incredibly hard steps. We hope to see you on that one.